Hello, everyone. I'm John Furrier with theCUBE Pod, episode 98 with Dave Vellante. Dave, salute. We're finally back at our offices.
Hello, Johnny boy. How you doing,
Davey
man?
boy, what's happening? Fist pump,
Good.
salute. Um, just
Happy birthday to your son.
Tyler turned
Wish I had some
23.
Sox tickets to hand him, but
My
no, that'll
youngest,
come.
my
It's
youngest is,
cold here. Lousy baseball weather.
when the Masters plays, it's always an East Coast ritual to turns on the golf season on the East Coast. Obviously in California, it's golf all year round, but what a great Masters this past week it was to watch
Amazing.
and fun to see. I love golf, love that tournament. And this week, just back in Palo Alto, grinding through. We had a great 2-week run with NYSE Wired. Brian Bauman continuing to build a great community down there, merging the tech and the finance community together. As you know, we got a lot more going on. And it's kind of like April was the calm before the storm, because next month in May, there's going to be a tsunami of events with theCUBE on the road. And of course, even here, we got the Builder's Summit, which happened this week with Scott Hepner, phenomenal event. Really doing a deep dive on what's going on under the covers. We got Mark Benioff exclusive interview that you're doing with George Gilbert on Tuesday. Just so much going on around agentic agents in particular is hyped up beyond all recognition. But under the covers, below the agents, all this stuff we've been covering, going back to a year ago when you guys really started doing that work and then published in The Economist on digital twins. I just seen so much change in the past year, and the news this week, again, points to the sentiment, Dave, of where this change is coming from. You got the FTC going after Meta. Zuckerberg's got a haircut. He's dressed up in a suit. He's got all the talking points. You got OpenAI introducing more reasoning models. You got the FTC going after Google. It's as if we are living in a changeover right now, and it's amazing time because the activity, kind of in the new guard coming in, the new batch of startups, and then the enterprises who are transforming not only the tech, but their business models. It's as if like there's an earthquake. It's a super moon cycle going on. Super moon, Dave, is coming, if you don't know that, but it's happening.
Yeah.
Super moon, super cloud, super chips. But there's going to be there's an earthquake happening. The tectonic plates in tech are shifting because the signaling of going after Meta, just they got to defend against that. You got FTC going after Google. These are the incumbent leaders, the big tech. Nvidia's stock got hammered. They're in China trying to save their quarter. It's just pretty disruptive time. And, in transitions and disruption, enablement is here. We're seeing it and covering it. So again, all the signals are coming in. And if you look at what Rob Ho's putting together on this week's newsletter, for the folks listening and watching, Rob Hof, our editor-in-chief of SiliconANGLE, puts together every Friday a rundown for the week in case you're busy. You got it all there. AI and data, OpenAI is pouring on the gas, a new brand. They could be the next Google, some say. Perplexity is doing a deal with Samsung. Again, so the new guard is emerging fast, and the old guard is nimble, like Salesforce. Mark Benioff's going to come on and talk about that. And of course, him and Satya Nadella at Microsoft going head to head. You covered that. So Dave, just so much happening in this market. And again, like we talked about in our analyst summit on the agent builder thing, this is an interesting time of change. And it's not like it's a slowdown. It's a ramp up. And it's just a whole nother, game in the arena, on the field. It's not being played in the dugout, as Scott Hepner said, or in the stands. It's people cranking it out.
Well, a couple of things. Andrew Ferguson's picking up right where Lena Khan left off, that's for sure. The FTC wants to break up Google. They want $30 billion of rawhide from Zuck. You saw the report that he's got balls. He offered $450 million to make it go away, and then he upped it to $1 billion. Yeah, I'll give you $1 billion if you don't try to break me up. Let's just end this trial now and don't try to get me for $30 billion. I don't think he's going to lose ultimately the trial, but I think it'd take years. It took 4 years to get to the courts. And so now it's just going to drag out. It reminds me of Microsoft back in the day. And of course, this is all happening when social media is going to change. He made the point, and I'd love to get your input on this because you were early on in Web 2.0 and social media. You were kind of right there at the beginning. He basically said that, and he's right, every 15 years, something new comes along. And he's arguing that the new social media is going to be this immersive experience with, remember Google Glass? I remember Alec, your son Alec, had him on at his graduation, and that was kind of cool. And of course that went by the wayside, but that was just a harbinger of things to come. The Meta glass, the Apple's got new, Apple Vision. And so there's a whole new experience coming in where you're going to be actually interacting, with AI, with humans, in this immersive experience, and things are going to change. At the same time, you got Perplexity and OpenAI going after Google. It's like classic. The U.S. government is always late to the party with their antitrust, suits. Looking back on the Instagram acquisition, what was that, 8 years ago? Um, I mean, it just doesn't seem right that you would say, all right, well, we're going to unhook that, undo that. They just seem to always have it wrong. Um, and then you got NVIDIA, whacked. They just announced yesterday they got a $5.5 billion charge because of the whole China restrictions on selling older technology. And at the same time, Huawei just introduced this thing. Did you see that, John? The cloud matrix? Did you see that?
No, I did not.
So Huawei has this system. So Jensen always says it's not just about the chips, it's about the entire system. Well, Huawei, not only do they have decent chips, they're more power hungry, they're not as good as NVIDIA, but Huawei's a good systems company. They're like Cisco and server companies combined, and they do silicon. So they've got a very capable, even though it's power hungry, thing called Cloud Matrix. So what they're doing is they're basically brute forcing it, and they're throwing a bunch of these Cloud Matrix, they're scale out, scale up at the problem. And even though they're power hungry and not very power efficient, China doesn't really care. They got tons of power. And so my point is, unless you restrict all the other surrounding components and subcomponents and tooling from China, they're going to keep pressing on, as we saw with DeepSeek. So again, the US government I don't think has a good understanding of all this, or maybe they have people who have a good understanding, but the policy that they enact just seems to always be a little bit, or sometimes a lot of it off.
Yeah, I mean, they're always late first of all, they don't have really anyone who understands it. There's a lot of critique of, the all-in guys going into politics with their pod. Some are saying, but even the Washington insiders are rejecting it because they view them as evil. But that's what people want to hear, the new voices. And I think one of the things about DC and the government is that they get it right and wrong at the same time. I mean, everyone knows Meta, Facebook, now Meta, basically had a monopoly. I mean, they knew them. Zuckerberg sent an email out years ago saying maybe we should split up Instagram as preparation. Every company knows where they have the leverage. Google's known they've had the leverage for years. They're not wrong with this competition. I mean, Zuckerberg's clear. Hey, TikTok's a threat, and it is a threat. Now, it's a different kind of threat, but owning Instagram and WhatsApp and Facebook is absolutely a competitive advantage. And if you ask Mark Zuckerberg, 20 years ago when he started Facebook, or before that, well, 25 years ago, but 20 years ago since the platform came out, you said, hey, if you're going to be regulated by the government, he would have said, bring it on. That means we've succeeded. They've already won. Meta's already successful. And, the scuttlebutt in Silicon Valley is if you look at Facebook, and if they didn't make the Instagram deal and didn't buy WhatsApp, what would it be? It might be MySpace, right? So, I mean, not a lot of people are using Facebook except for old people that have been on like me and see friends from high school. But most people are on Instagram. So Facebook actually was smart to buy Instagram at that time. So again, this is just progression. I mean, they did a great job of competing and winning. And again, part of me is like, they deserve to have that position. There is competition. He's not wrong. But also they have now a lot of leverage. Now that's competitive advantage, I guess. But at some point, if your infrastructure, it's a tough way to look at them. It's not a clear black and white answer. I can tell you right now that, they've done things, and everyone knows this came out publicly during the 2 elections ago, that they basically looked the other way and favored capitalism over democracy. And I think they're getting a little pound of flesh on that now with the restrictions. But Facebook even recognizes that they have position. There's internal emails flowing out on it. So I think Zuckerberg knows it, and it's a question of what can he hold on to. But they have an advantage. I mean, how hard would it be for anyone to kind of compete with that infrastructure? I mean, having Facebook, WhatsApp, and Instagram is a huge position. So it's definitely there. Google has been monopolizing online advertising because they just cleared the field. They just won everything. So at some point, you're big, and the government's action's a little bit too late and a dollar short, in my opinion. And I think it's just a distraction, but it does open the door. Just that, that hiccup, Dave, gives people like Perplexity and OpenAI a chance to compete. So I don't think the government will have a heavy hand in wrecking the industry, but it does send the signal. And I think you'll see competition come in, just like Microsoft. You and I debated this on our third pod. When we debated the trial, I said it crippled Microsoft. You said it didn't have much of an issue. I think in '97, because of the distraction, they missed search. Google took it down. Google was a nobody, okay, at that time. So they started in '98. So Google didn't say we're going to beat Microsoft, but again, that opened the door, and Microsoft didn't get their power. So maybe it's an antibody for capital. I don't know what to say on that, but other than, they made their bed.
I,
Right?
I felt like, I still feel like Lena Khan was taking credit. She certainly took credit of how wonderful the AT&T breakup was. I've said many times that, we lost Bell Labs and we got a bunch of baby bells that turned into a bunch of big, dumb, slow, cable companies. So that was a fail, in my opinion. Even though I think actually the AT&T breakup, the motivation at least was somewhat sensible. It's just the execution was poor. The question I have, John, because basically what you just, if I could summarize what you just said, is that Meta, at the time Facebook earned its position. It saw that that it was going to shift from desktop to mobile. It saw that Apple was going to screw it, and because Apple had all the leverage, and Zuckerberg was getting ahead of that. It said, let's buy Instagram for a boatload of dough, much more than it was sort of theoretically worth, and we're going to get to mobile way, way faster, and it worked. So the question I have is, okay, what have they done that's illegal? I would go back to Microsoft and say, I would still argue that in the history of antitrust, that forget AT&T for a second, because that was, really clearly was a monopoly that the government created, and then they tore apart poorly. But in the case of IBM, the Justice Department, and in the case of Microsoft with the Justice Department, I would argue in both cases, IBM and Microsoft, they were self-inflicted wounds driven by hubris, lack of understanding of the market, innovator's dilemma, whatever you want to call it. Very clearly, IBM mistakenly gave its monopoly over to Intel and Microsoft. And I think Microsoft, I always use the example of Ballmer trying to put Windows on a phone, because Windows was all they had. And so they weren't innovating. And that was in my opinion, combined with open source, Linux, that and the LAMP stack, those were the factors that plus hubris led to Microsoft going sideways. I'm not saying that the Justice Department wasn't a factor, but I don't think, even if there wasn't that lawsuit, I think they still would have, missed. My issue with Microsoft was they were bundling, and they were bombing prices.
They were a monopoly. I saw contracts where Microsoft basically said, if you use Netscape browser, we will not support you.
Right, but so hold on. So yes, they were a monopoly, but being a monopoly in and of itself isn't a crime. Using your monopoly power illegally is a crime. And I would agree with you that Microsoft did that. I don't think IBM originally did, but then they stopped. But Microsoft bundled, they bombed prices, they did strong arm tactics, like you were saying. And so in that sense, the DOJ was right. They were just a day late and a dollar short. Now, so the question is, what is Facebook doing today that's illegal? And are they breaking the law, or are they just big? And the government saying, well, you're too big and you're too powerful.
You're getting focused on the law piece, which is the accurate one. My point was, it's not so much Microsoft broke the law, but that caused the action against them. And my point, and you can talk about the phone, which is way downstream. In 1997, between 1997 and 2004 was the kind of the window. That's pre-iPhone. Then a lot of phones were out there like Blackberries, but the Windows Phone wasn't the issue, and their ineptness was a function of probably their dogma. But my point is that because of their success and their monopoly power, which they exercised, and you pointed that out, I think that's true. The action came against them. And I think Meta has the same thing going on. So, but with respect to Microsoft, because I know I was there, I was the head of product for Real Names, that founded by Keith Tier, and we were a competitor. Everyone in my world knows that story. I was running the product team there. They were doing all the keyword navigation for the web. 70% of the web traffic was going through our servers at that time. In 2000, 1999, 2000, 2001, 70% of all web traffic, all of it, was going through our servers. Google didn't even have AdWords. Microsoft owned 20% of the company. 10% was owned by Network Solutions, which then became VeriSign. So
Okay.
Microsoft had search. They had 70% of the search traffic. Okay. They got caught on that speeding ticket called the browser war, which they beat Netscape and were kind of caught red-handed. So my premise is that they were distracted by the fact that they were so much sideways. They were conservative, just their posture, and then probably their dogma factored into it. They had search and then just gave it up, and Google just took it over. So, and then Microsoft shut down Real Names, company I worked for, and they didn't do anything with it. So and they had MSN, other things online before that. But so search was in play from 1999 to 2001. Google picked that up and ran the table. After that was the Web 2.0 wave, which became, YouTube, the phone, iPod, that kind of thing was going on. And that Web 2.0 was a window that they also bungled up. So I think that was, they were a little bit more aware, but I think these actions by the government create a huge management time sink. Distraction, focus, you get a little gun shy, you don't want to go after, you can't be aggressive. Certainly Microsoft was like clean as a whistle. They weren't doing anything innovative. So I think that really kind of stunts their growth. And you know what? They kind of deserved it. My point with Meta is they kind of deserve it. No one's saying, yay, Microsoft is not innovating. No, I mean, it's just opportunity for other people. Google, I think it's way late in the game. They could have been gone after a decade ago. So um, it's a function of success. Unfortunately, this is the United States we live in. And I think that's the big test now. Would we be better off if Microsoft had dominated search and Google never existed? Is it better that Meta gets breaking up and then we don't leverage that infrastructure? That's a good question. I don't know what
Well,
the
but
answer is.
you're arguing, I actually think you're making my point for me, because you're arguing that Microsoft was distracted because of the government's intervention, but I just say they weren't distracted, they were focused on the wrong thing. Would you rather be Google with search, or the Brave browser? I mean, right?
I mean,
They were focused like a laser on killing Netscape because they thought the browser was the future. It turned out search was a way more, economically superior business.
it's funny, Dave. The world just turns in so many different directions. This is a story that no one really knows about because I don't think it's ever been documented in public. But in Silicon Valley in 1998, 1999, Kleiner Perkins and Sequoia, they probably will deny this, but this actually was true. I sourced this and get confirmation. They wanted to get rid of Google's stock. They didn't want anything to do with Google. Google was doing nothing. They were a bunch of Stanford guys that cut a deal with Yahoo and got some distribution. They weren't making any money, and would have board meetings that were like drinking wine and hanging out. Um, it was just a academic environment, and it was Omid Kordestani that came from Netscape that actually turned on the monetization with AdWords. And again, that was a result of Real Names failing because of Microsoft closing them down and a variety of other things in the market. At that time, the bubble burst. So there was a time where Google was considered a shitty company that no one wanted, and then they become to be a legend. So that is actually a Silicon Valley true story. Okay, so that's the difference between Google becoming now a monopoly and worth billions and billions of dollars versus them not making it, because that's how startups work. Sometimes, the investors get crazy. It doesn't have traction. It's got hair on it, whatever. That's the difference between how fast you can go to zero versus become the next big thing. So again, in this market, I think with Meta and Google and all this activity and Nvidia getting a little distracted, that gives opportunity to others. So we're a capitalist economy. So guess what's going to walk in the front door? OpenAI, Perplexity. Some say Perplexity is better than Google. I think it is. You love Grok with the Twitter AI. Got Anthropic's kicking ass. So again, there is definitely competition in AI. So it's not like it's going to be a zero. It's a zero-sum game as far as I'm concerned. But again, that's the point.
I think,
It's not so
I
much
think,
the action that they're going to get broken up like AT&T, because I think that was just the one-off. But they get dragged down. That's what's happening.
but what's the right remedy? Is the remedy to break them up? Is the remedy to, say, look back and say, okay, we're going to unhook Instagram? Is the remedy a big fine? I mean, what's the right remedy, and what's the ethical, maybe not ethical is not the right word, but what's the logical motivation for that. I think the rule of law, it should be, I mean, the Sherman Antitrust Act should be the adjudicating, law. And so it's the interpretation of that I think is being bent by Lena Khan and now Andrew Ferguson and the Justice Department and the FTC. And so they're trying to basically change the way in which the law is applied. Now, I think reasonable people can argue, and I think this is the argument you're making, it's not necessarily a bad thing because, to Lena Khan's point, it does allow more competition. I just think in the history of tech, and maybe it's different now, but in the history of tech, market forces have always done a better job than the government of determining winners and losers.
I mean, I think you said it, the market forces, because the market forces is lobbying. It's also people pissed off at the monopoly power or their position. And, I think Facebook realizes that, I mean, they could just get through this and they take their medicine. Like I said, they offered, tons of cash to even avoid this. And I think it's just people manipulating the Sherman Antitrust Act, like you said. So it's like, if you go by the letter of the law, the market conditions change, there's motivation coming from all angles. Anyway,
Well, one other point I want to make, I mean, we saw with Huawei, China's answer to the GB200 and NVLink 72. And it's this brute force thing. And so China's got an answer. So my point is, when you think about Amazon and Microsoft and Google and Meta and Nvidia, on the one hand, for the United States competitiveness, which everybody's talking about, the administration's like, we got to be more competitive. We have to win. We have to win the AI race. Well, these are the companies that are going to help us win the AI race. And we're like, okay, let's put a handcuff, tie one hand behind the back, and let's go win. It's just surprising to me, the different aspects of the government and even the POTUS. There seems to be a real dissonance in what the objectives are. Is it the objective to win the AI race, at all costs for military and, of national interests, or is it to let there be more competition? And I would argue there's plenty of competition in tech. Don't worry about that.
This competition is not the issue. I think it's more of, the media is like this too. Once they build you up, then they break you down. So I think this is one of those things where it's just market forces. It's just like, take down the big guys. And look, I think this is what we were saying, and I'd love to kind of change to kind of that discussion around, not prepping for, but just talking about what we said at the top about Mark Benioff coming on. He wrote a killer post on Twitter about the stories you've written, and we talked about it on our analyst summary of the Builder Summit that Scott Hebner talked about, which is, we're in a time now where there's significant change going on and new leaders are coming, right? There is more startups now on AI than I've ever seen. And they're kind of either going to make it or not, but they look different. They look like different companies than, say, 5 years ago even. And then you got the big companies, which traditionally in these disruptive markets are the ones that get taken down as the incumbent default winners. And I think with AI, one of the things that we were talking about, I want to get your thoughts on this and talk about how it relates to kind of like Salesforce, which would be a target for companies to take down. The enterprises right now aren't dying with AI. They're actually winning. The rich get richer with AI. We said this on pod many pods ago, which is AI helps the big people too, because they have the data and the workflows. So we're living in a time where the startups are coming in and their targets, the enterprise winners, the leaders in the industry, also have the agility to move fast. So I think we're in a very interesting time where a company like Salesforce would look like a target if I was a startup to take down Salesforce. And VC's like, yeah, go take down Salesforce. I don't think they can be taken down. I don't think that even their size, and they are kind of like that aircraft carrier analogy. They don't move very fast. But I think from now with AI, they can make their products better faster. Okay, maybe they may move as a big company, but I think people are more agile with the data if they have it, and Salesforce has a ton of data. And so I want to get your thoughts on this, because if that's true, then the playing field's essentially leveled. And if that's true, what does the company need to do that? Is it the culture? So, I mean, what's your reaction? We talked about this, about culture, but Dave, do you agree with that or not?
I do agree with it. I would say that, again, we said this yesterday in the Agent Builder Summit. If you look back, we've been preparing for this moment for a decade with cloud, mobile, social and big data. And social obviously puts a lot of, exhaust out there in terms of data. But of the four, the first three lived up to their promise. I would say they exceeded their promise. I mean, cloud, a lot of people poo-pooed it. Carl Eschenbach called Amazon a bookseller, okay? So I'd say they wildly exceeded the original cloud expectations. Mobile completely changed the world. That's why Zuck bought Instagram, and our whole life is mobile. Anything not mobile sucks. And social, I mean, our children, it's all they do. They don't go outside and play baseball anymore. They're just on social media. So good or bad, it's certainly changed societal behavior. Big data was essentially failed to live up to its promises. We know the complexity of Hadoop, and you look at what ultimately the big success was separating compute from storage and cloud data warehouses, Google BigQuery, and obviously Snowflake and Databricks. Okay, check, that's great. We got some wins in analytics, but it really didn't, it wasn't the wildly exceeded the expectations that were set forth. I would say it underperformed. And so I would say there's a caution in this world of agentic AI. And that caution is, if you don't have your data act together, you're going to be underwhelmed. You're going to be disappointed. You're not going to get the ROI that you want. And most companies don't have their data act together. And that it was interesting in the Agent Builder Summit to juxtapose the vendor hype from the practitioner reality. And I think the practitioner reality is this is going to take a long time to play out. It's going to be a journey, and there's going to be some quick wins. There's going to be some failures. And I think a data culture, to your point, is fundamental, and data literacy is vital. People talk about, oh, we're data driven. And then you look at the data that they're analyzing, you're like, you're looking at the wrong data, or your data's crap. And they sit around and still argue about the efficacy of the data. So that's the starting point here. And I do think that culture is a vital component of that, maybe the most important piece of it.
Well, talking about all its power in the agent technologies, all the AI infrastructure, which we've been covering on theCUBE, but if you look at what's happening now with the tariffs, this came up and you saw Nvidia take a $5 billion charge by selling chips to China. It sounds like they squeaked it through. I wonder how much money they actually made on it, Dave. Interesting to see.
Yeah.
The penalty. It's like that Nike movie. It's like, we'll pay the fine. Like they'll make so much cash around it. So I think the question is that, Jensen's in China right now, making his way back in. The markets are back up, chipping away, probably will normalize from that big swing on the tariff conversation. But man, I mean, this is a huge story, because if the supply chain is disrupted, but there's back doors into China, and him going over there is a huge statement. I wonder, one, what it means to the business. Number two, does this stall the innovation on the AI side? Because remember, as we've been saying on theCUBE and SiliconANGLE and theCUBE research, which is turning out to be true, is that wave of innovation and the value that's going to be extracted from that is going to be enabled by the infrastructure. And if the infrastructure stalls, okay, then we got a problem. I mean, what's your take on this, and what are you hearing?
I think on the one hand, I applaud Jensen for going to China. Reminds me of Nixon. I was a kid when Nixon went over there. Warren Buffett will often say the best outcome is that we're trading partners. Ben Franklin, trading partners seldom wage war. At the same time, there are definite national interests and military, concerns about, putting, key AI technologies in the hands of the Chinese. My feeling is the world is better off if we are trading partners. I think there is room for negotiation in terms of policy, what's allowed, United States companies selling into China, the trade imbalance, which to me, if the trade imbalance is 3 to 4% of GDP, I'm fine with that. If it starts to get up much higher than that, that's a problem. I think we're better off, being friends with China and competing, because I think America is, very good at competing and winning. And I think Ray Dalio has it right. The far bigger issue is the debt. And if we don't solve that, we ain't gonna win anything. Getting debt down to 3% of GDP. That should be a high priority item for the administration. I mean, what happened to pro-growth, pro-business, lower taxes, pro-cost cutting, crypto-friendly, IPO and M&A friendly? What happened to all that? I mean, it seems like
I think we're pretty
overall
crypto friendly right now.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, crypto sort of trading, with the market, with the risk on assets. And it's like, what happened to pro-business, pro-economy, pro-growth? I worry about inflation and low growth. I mean, I remember the 70s well. It was 10 years of stagflation, and it was horrible.
Well, first of all, I mean, I definitely disagree with you. I think we are more pro crypto than certainly past 4 years. We just did.
Yeah, that's true. That is definitely Gary Gensler, no question. You can't be
did
more
an expert series.
anti-crypto than
Crypto
Gary.
trailblazers came through, and I talked to all the leaders in crypto, and I can tell you right now that they're ecstatic. Vitalik, the founder of Ethereum, came to the U.S. for the first time in 4 years, and there's even discussions about IPOs and the NYSE as being the crypto exchange. So,
But wasn't that before tariffs, John? Before the big tariff turmoil, or no? Am I mistaken?
it happened before, but the crypto wasn't really impact. It did impact the price of Bitcoin and Ethereum, but it didn't affect the policy. If you look at Trump, he actually killed one of the divisions that did the oversight, SEC.
Yeah, that's
killed,
fair. You're right you're totally right about that. It's just that he's dragging the market down, and crypto's getting dragged down with it.
Well,
So
crypto has bit mining. They have mining capabilities. They require chips too. In fact, we just did a story on SiliconANGLE about a company I'll be interviewing today. Just raised 130 million. They're doing mining and then AI networking. So, crypto is in the same industry as all the AI chips, so they're impacted by default. So, yeah, tariffs will impact them. But when you talk about government structure, they're definitely a pro crypto world right now. And we got the Bitcoin reserve. Trump is all over that, and China's got a lot of Bitcoin too. I was reading a story that they got a little stockpile going on. So I think the crypto is where the trade war will be, in my opinion. It's not. I think this is just like little kid on the playground saying, "I have your lunch money," kind of thing going on, like right now.
We don't know who was selling U.S. Treasuries yet, do we? Have we found out yet? Did they announce? Did we get that data yet, or does that come at the end of the month? Because that's the big concern, right? I mean, when the yield on long bonds goes up, on the 10-year Treasury goes up, you would think the dollar goes up too, but the dollar has been depreciating for the last, 30, 60, 90 days. So that, again, it brings me back to I get PTSD from the stagflation days of the 70s. I mean, I was just a kid, but still, I mean, my parents, I look back, I grew up in that era, and the economy was horrible until Reagan came in and opened up the checkbook. But I don't know. Trump is so focused. He's got his ideology, and he's been right a lot. But I don't know. I feel like the administration really doesn't have a clear plan. I think they're just pushing a bunch of buttons that are enacting forces that are in conflict with each other. So I don't see.
I think there's an actual plan. I don't. But what I think.
What's the plan? What would you say? Negotiation tactic or?
Well, first of all, I'd say that I think there's a plan, but no one knows what it is. I think there's a hidden agenda. I think the hidden agenda is because you got too many smart people around the table. You think Bessett's there just sucking up to Trump to be in the limelight? I think there's actually some thinking going on around some smart people that want to look at redistribution of wealth, look at setting up some structural things. I don't know what it is because I haven't put the puzzle together, but the first thing is, negotiations. That was clearly the first strike. That's Trump. The art of the deal, the book he didn't write. Apparently he was ghostwritten, but he wants to be seen as the deal maker. And I have no problem with that strategy, by the way, of the negotiation. Hey, I force everyone to the table. Okay, I have no problem.
Well, but let me interrupt. Why couldn't we have just gone to all these other countries and say, hey, we're going to go ballistic on you unless you give some reciprocity here, and then just focus the ire on China. We could have got to the same place without tanking everybody's 401k.
Maybe they did that in the past, and people roll their eyes. Hey, we'll just give the U.S. a bunch of lip service, and then not do anything like they haven't done it before.
Maybe
no one really knows the answer. That gets.
Of course, you wouldn't have got headlines on that either.
Yeah, send the junior program manager out there. Hey, ambassador, go and put the pressure on him. Versus.
Yeah, you might be right.
Yeah, Trump's went over the top, but he made his point. What you're saying is have someone make the point assertively. Now, the question is, who does that and what does that look like? So that's a good question to ask, I think, but it's already, the genie's out of the bottle. Once he made his move, it was clearly a negotiation because once the market tanked, I was in the building at the NYSE for those Thursday and Friday, those bloody days. It was all red, okay, except for volume was up. And it was brutal. And, I comment on CNN, to the CNN report. I'm like, look at the market voted, right? I mean, this is the market. This ain't the voting booth. This is the globe. Is saying this is shit, cut the crap, as they say, And
Yeah,
then
they have
what,
the stock market vigilantes, not just the bond vigilantes.
let me tell you, they don't mince words. And I was talking to Ken Schiffman about this we were walking out of the exchange. He's like, he'll never walk it back. He's too much of an ego. I go, he's got too much of an ego not to walk it back and he ended up walking it back. Why? Because he got his bluff called. And the market said, we don't want this. We want certainty. And he didn't have an answer for that. And I think that shows that there's a hidden agenda, in my opinion. That kind of where my head's at, because if he couldn't answer the question by that Monday and Tuesday without walking it back, he has no plan, or it's a hidden agenda, or both. It's either way, it's worse. He's got no plan, and it's a hidden agenda, or it's a hidden agenda. Either way, it's a shitty strategy. So they have to come clean on this. The Bessett's of the world and the so-called experts, the so-called
Dangerous game. Dangerous games. I hear Howard Lutnick talking about, the beauty of people, Americans screwing in, screws in iPhones. It's like, what? That's not where the cost of iPhones is. It's in all the components and the silicon. And I mean, what are you talking about? So that
Kara Swisher was adamant on this, and like I said in the last pod, I kind of agree with her, but also disagree with her. I think that's the wrong question. It's an easy thing to say. You can't build iPhones in the United States today. That's true. That is a true statement. It's unique hardware. It's specialized. They know the workflows. It would be a catastrophic event for Apple, right? So,
did she write about that? I didn't see that. I
well, she hates anything that goes on with Elon.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's like she's vitriol.
Musk and Trump.
Her entire journalism career turned into, a hate machine. It's a little bit tainted, but she's not wrong on that. My point was where she doesn't see the vision is that the question to ask is, can we be competitive and build iPhones in the future? That's where you see TSMC now got 8 factories in Arizona. You got Texas building out data centers. Our robotics event we had in New York City at the NYSE and here in Palo Alto proves the fact that the technology is now available so that you can have a new modern manufacturing plant that is built from the ground up to be versatile, agile, and multi-purpose. Not this factory builds this widget or car or whatever it is in the big old school days of like Midwest factories town. No, I think you're going to see like smart factories come out where they could be the size of a warehouse and bang out anything. And then you got a supply chain that's networked in the United States. I think that's a U.S. competitive strategy opportunity, but that's going to take 3 to 5 years minimum, because the robotics technology and AI is coming to the table and there are already proof points. So that's the brains in Washington should be working on that equation, not just slapping tariffs and saying, move your iPhones tomorrow over to the United States. That's never going to happen.
I would argue that a lot of those things you just talked about, those factories in Arizona, and maybe obviously not Texas, Abilene, although part of that was Abilene was in motion. I'd say a lot of that was concomitant with the CHIPS Act, which again, the administration wants to kill. I don't want to kill it. I just want to redirect it so that, Intel Foundry can survive, which by the way, it looks like Intel is going to stay the course and become, my view anyway, maybe a profitable manufacturer of x86 and new Intel chips and lower tech chips, maybe the next global foundries. So, I mean, I think it's not a bad strategy. I've been so critical of Intel, but I think it's reasonable to say, hey, we're going to cut cost and we're going to compete selectively. We may not be, meet our goal of being the number 2 foundry in the world and the advanced manufacturer that we want it to be, but we'll get advanced manufacturing in the U.S. through TSM. This is kind of Matt Garman's thing. I don't really care if it's a U.S.-based company as long as it's U.S. manufacturing. And in his words, I'm not sure I want to pay for it. So his scenario is kind of, you remember we talked about that in the coupon, his scenario is kind of playing out. It's like, let TSM do it. They'll be fine as long as they're on US shores. I prefer to see it be Intel or a US-based joint
Well,
venture.
NVIDIA
But
announced this week that they're going to plan to mass produce Blackwell in the United States with TSMC in
yeah,
Arizona. Back to the fab plant. Brian Bellman and I got a peek at the plans, and they call Arizona Silicon Sands. And I think you're going to see Arizona and Texas become basically modern data center areas because they got a lot of solar opportunities there, and they could be a mecca. So, Intel has a location in Arizona as well. So, I mean, NVIDIA could be, TMC could be ramping up, TSMC could be ramping up big time. And again, the long game on chips is not a year thing. So I think that's the big discussion. But NVIDIA's got to get back on the track. And I think the DeepSeek and NVIDIA, these kind of innovations can't stop. Otherwise, all the hype around agents could have a dot-com bubble burst. So, like I said, you're going to talk
yeah.
to Mark Benioff. He's a direct consumer of that value. He was the
Well,
first SaaS cloud. Can agents be a SaaS type market? And that's what we are seeing on theCUBE. And I think we talked about that, which is like the SaaS business the cloud made the SaaS business. So Apple, App Store, AWS, and the mobile phone created software as a service, in my opinion.
yeah,
So
yeah,
that's a
absolutely.
massive generational societal benefit. Now it's cloud and AI and distributed computing that's going to enable the next wave, which could be, some say, bigger. We're trying to size the market at theCUBE Research, but it could be 3x SaaS in terms of market. Okay, that's the agents, all these agents coming out. So, Dave, if that happens, I mean, think about that because now you have everyone writing apps.
Well, the data center market is going to be 5x what it was pre-COVID. And that you said that yesterday when we were talking to Scott on the Agent Builder Summit that the SaaS that agentic could outstrip SaaS. I think you're right on. I think it will.
Well,
It's
you
just
had the chart on the enterprise data, and I
yeah.
think it's the combination of both worlds intersecting. Because you take your data center trillion, I forget the number was massive.
It's a trillion in the early next decade, up from low 200s last decade. I mean, we're talking 200 to 220 billion-dollar data center business, growing to $1 trillion by the early 2030s.
Yeah.
I mean,
So
that's
SaaS
amazing.
sold to the enterprise. Now you have the
And by the way,
enterprise.
sorry to interrupt. By the way, this forecast you can poo-poo them, but it grew from like low single digits in 2022. In 2024, it grew 58%. Think about that for a second.
So just explain what grew the enterprise.
So the data center spending, when you think about data center build-outs, the power, the
Yeah.
cooling, the storage, the compute, the networking, grew from like 220 billion to 350 billion. It grew like 58% in 1 year. So it's on a trajectory to just blow away. I mean, 50% in a boring data center business. Amazing. And so this is happening, and that's providing the infrastructure. It's like cloud. To your point, when cloud happened, SaaS companies said, oh, wow, I can SaaSify everything from email to CRM to HCM, to vertical apps, you name it.
Yeah.
We're going to SaaSify the world. Now we're going to agentify the world. It's just, like I said before, it's going to take a while.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's mind blowing. And again, this is why when we started, we're going to end with the same kind of full circle. The market is changing, and I think the signaling around Meta is just showing a transformational shift to a new generation of people, players, technology, and infrastructure. And I think it's already happened. It's happening, and when that happens, you'll see new solutions, new user experiences, new expectations, but you'll see new brands emerge, right? I think that's the beautiful thing about these waves is you're going to see something come out of left field unexpected. So I'm constantly like scouring the landscape and looking for those signals because, you know, I always talk about Airbnb. Who would have thought hotels would be out of business, not out of business, but like disrupted by Airbnb, rent out your house. No one would, that's just a weird idea that just makes mainstream, becomes obvious when it's after the fact. SaaS, you got Dropbox, Box, and these companies. file sharing, store in the cloud. So I think agents will absolutely, and the infrastructure is going to change that. And again, your IT data center example proves that to me, at least we'll see, that the SaaS market of entrepreneurship and companies and the enterprise become one TAM. So we'll see, because they're making solutions too. Why can't
Yep.
they be in the consumer business directly? Why do I have to use something else? So it's very, very interesting, Dave. Um, I guess the final minutes we have left, I want to ask you about Mark Benioff. I brought up a couple times. I know you're interviewing him on Tuesday with George Gilbert. I've known Mark over 20 years when he was, more hands-on. Now he's a figurehead, right, in multi-billions of dollars of business. But Salesforce is still relevant because they got the data. What are you going to talk about? What's on the agenda?
So in our view, Salesforce is one of the early leaders in agentic, and what they've done is they've done a lot of the hard engineering work to bring together their data cloud. We always talk about the need to harmonize that data. They're doing that work. They've done that work. They're taking steps in that direction. They are deploying agents. They're orchestrating and governing those agents. Now they've got the advantage in that they've got a data set and they've got all these assets. And they know they have a lot of data about the customer, but they're also doing some really interesting things, enabling outside data to leverage their data cloud. And well, I mean, the history in Heroku and their app dev angles. And so what we want to talk about with Benioff is the future of the industry. And it's like Zuckerberg said, every 15 years, something new comes along. And this is clearly something that's new, that's coming along. And we want to understand how Benioff sees it playing out. And we also want to try to figure out, suss out what's real and what's hype, because, clearly, I mean, Benioff is a hype master. He's an amazing, salesperson. And so,
He's also got a good nose for the trends. He knows. I love your line. The trend is your friend. He is really smart. He can read the tea leaves. I mean, he was SaaS before SaaS was SaaS. He
started cloud SaaS. Totally before
no 1999.
There's
no cloud at
Think
that
about
time.
that. And you'll remember well when Oracle kicked him off the stage or buried him on Thursday right after the big party, and he said, "Screw that."
He had an unconference. Remember, he had the people picketing up the signs, and we went to the St. Francis, and I was in the front row streaming on Justin TV.
It was awesome.
He saw the camera, and he actually stood in a position to get a good camera angle because he knew we were live streaming. He was so savvy.
That was great. Hey, you went, "Hey, Mark, John Furrier, SiliconANGLE. Hey, John." That was so good. You remember, you turned around your laptop. You had your laptop, you turned it around, you had Skype going, you were feeding it into our studio, the CUBE studio, on the floor of Oracle Open World, interviewing Benioff. That was epic.
Michael Dell and Mark Benioff have a good nose for, the zeitgeist. They have smart antenna on, who's got the real deal and who doesn't. And I think, I've always admired that about those two guys, because as CEOs, that what makes a great CEOs. They have to have their finger on the pulse and think about the future. It's hard to context switch that way, and that's some of the best CEOs. So, hey, I wish I could be on the interview with you, but I'll do a cameo and do a Brian Bauman photo. Hey, look at us, do a thumbs up.
George will be in studio, right? So it's George Gilbert. Props to him. He's the one who got this set up. So
maybe I'll gate crash it and say, hey, I'll sit there and smile.
I said, George, get Mark to come into the studio. I guess Mark's coming in remote, but doesn't want to drive down from San Francisco. I guess I don't blame him. We should
fly. We should go up to his office and do a sit down deep dive. I mean, he would be great on camera to do a one-on-one. So we'll knock down the podcast. You guys knock down that podcast segment.
Well, again, credit to George, because Benioff read our stuff and he's like, wow, this is really detailed, and these guys did their homework. And George leads that, and I help him sort of position it, and I ask a lot of dumb questions so that we can communicate it to an audience, and then we package it. And so Benioff saw it, he liked it, he thought we did a good job, thought it was technically accurate, and agreed to come on the program.
All right, well, Dave, great to pod. I know you got to do another interview, got to jump in. I got a hot startup coming in.
All right, cool.
A story about them. They just raised $153 million to do Bitcoin mining and AI networking. So great pod. Check out SiliconANGLE.com. And again, check it out. We've got all the top stories there. TheCubeResearch.com. TheCubeAI.com is the Cube Retriever. All of our transcripts are there from the Cube video. TheCube.net is where you'll find out where the Cube is next, of course. DM us if you we'd love to get the DMs. I get tons of DMs. Let us know what you think, and see you next time.
Happy Easter, everybody.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to theCUBE. I'm John Furrier, your host. Join theCUBE and myself at RSA 2025 this year, taking place in San Francisco, April 28th to May 1st. This is an unparalleled cybersecurity experience. This is an opportunity to dive into expert-led sessions, discover groundbreaking solutions, and network with top industry leaders from around the world. Whether you're looking to sharpen your skills, explore new trends, or connect with like-minded professionals, there's something for everybody. Come away with new strategies, insights, and connections to elevate your game in the cybersecurity journey. Many voices, one community. Check out rsa.com/thecube25 to learn more and register. That's rsaconference.com/thecube25 to learn more and register.